Good afternoon, everybody. I can see that there's been a bit of a movement in traffic out there. So I hope everybody can settle down. As I was introduced, I'm Sanjeev Gupta, your moderator for this session. And I must confess that I am starting with two very major disadvantages. One is that I'm sorry I don't speak any French, so this whole session has to be in English. So my apologies for that. And secondly, and more importantly, I'm the only guy in this panel here who has not made sports a living. In other words, what I know about sports or the standard of sports I play is worth not talking about. My background is I'm a financier, I'm a banker, and therefore I'm really curious. I'm curious because right through the day, even at the last panel, we heard about the talent that exists in Africa as far as sports is concerned. We heard about the passion that exists in Africa around sports. We heard about the amount of watching of sports, the sports audience that exists in Africa. And we know the amount of sports that is played in Africa. But what I don't see, which is where my narrow finance background comes in, is I don't see sports as a commercially viable industrial activity on the continent yet, right? And that doesn't make sense, because when you have talent, when you have supply, when you have demand, what's not happening? Because rest of the world, sports is anywhere between 3 to 5% of a country's GDP. In Africa, I think it's below 0.5, if at all. It creates jobs, and in Africa it doesn't. Yet talent goes out. So that's really what we want to explore and examine in the next 30, 35 minutes. That what will it take for what is inherently there to become an industry, right? And I want to come to you, Amadou, because, not because of your size, which itself is intimidating, but because you come from the erstwhile, not so much the erstwhile, but the famous NBA background. You opened up BAL, and you have shown that sports can become a commercially viable activity. So tell the audience, how did you do it? What made you do it? And what are the lessons that you want to share out of it?
Thank you, Sanjay. And first of all, I want to thank the organizers, Evo Sports, our partners, by the way. We agreed to spend time in Morocco across 4 cities in our efforts to grow the game at grassroots level, to launch 4 junior NBA programs, just to get young people involved and give them access to the game of basketball. And that's where I will start. What you see today, the Basketball Africa League, is a culmination of many decades of work that the NBA has engaged on the African continent, working with FIBA, first launching programs like Basketball Without Borders in 2003, just to get a glimpse of the incredible amount of talent that exists out of Africa. I know that's the team. We all know we're the biggest exporter of talent. We're the biggest exporter of raw natural resources in all kinds of other industries. But we decided that at some point that it was time to look to create something right here on the continent that is going to showcase this incredible amount of talent and build a league that is going to be centered around what Africa has best to offer. We are a professional basketball league. a Pan-African Professional Basketball League. Our model is like a Champions League. We have 12 teams coming from 12 different countries, and we have them in 3 conferences playing in multiple African countries. And the reason we're doing this is to really leverage the movements of people, the interest that people have and need to discover Africa, as a destination. And we decided that the talent we've always exported, now we wanted to find a way to retain some of the talent here and also attract global talent. That's really what led to the league. So we didn't open the NBA office in 2010 in South Africa and say, hey, let's start a professional league. We wanted to make sure we put the fundamentals in place. We started training and creating structures here on the continent that gave young people more access to the game. And now one of the things we're most proud of is the complete pathway we've created where a young person can have access to the game if they have a passion to start playing the game at grassroots level and ultimately make it to the pros right here on the continent. Our league, as you talk about GDPs and what sports contribute to GDPs in the West, since we started in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic, the league has contributed directly or indirectly by $250 million in African GDPs. You talk about jobs. The league has created 37,000 jobs direct or indirectly where we host and also across the African countries. We activate so many industries. We see so many new jobs. I've seen so many young entrepreneurs creating logistics companies, security company, content creators. We see hotels boosting tourism. So that activity that we're starting to see for us is why we are confident that we are going to build one of the best professional basketball league in years to come right here in Africa.
Thank you, Amadou. The best league in Africa. Well done. And I think you used a couple of key words there, which I just want to emphasize. And that is that you have shown that the experience that people have had outside Africa, as far as sports is concerned, in terms of the economic multiplier, in terms of the social multiplier, in terms of the employment multiplier, with the work you've already done, you're already seeing early signs of success in that regard. Yep. And that's a very important message to the African continent. Let me come to you, Mr. Dikko. And, you obviously come from one of the most populous countries of the world, never mind the most populous country in Africa. You come from what was, till recently, the largest economy in Africa. I think somebody has pipped you recently. And you yourself, having played sports at a very high level yourself, you are now looking at sports as a sector that needs to be developed in Nigeria, right? That's the role that the current administration in Nigeria has given you. Please tell us, what are your plans to make sports a commercially viable activity that adds value to the economy of Nigeria? You heard what Amadou is doing on the basketball side, but obviously there is more sports than just basketball. And you are yourself a footballer, from what I can remember. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm honored to be here. I appreciate it. Really, as you said, what we are trying to do in Nigeria at the moment aligns to clearly the principles and the foundation that was laid here by Ahmed. You may recall that in Nigeria now, we took a bold decision that led by our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, that we need to lead in Africa to now change the framework of how we run sports in Africa, so we can be able to create the right fundamentals to achieve the right targets, just as explained by Ahmed here. So the first step, what we did, or the President did, is to scrap what we call the Federal Ministry of Sports, because when you put sports under a ministry, under the bureaucracy of the civil service, it doesn't give it the platform and the framework to be what it's supposed to be. Sports should be seen on a different light. So we scrapped the ministry. We now created what we call the National Sports Commission. The National Sports Commission now is supposed to be like a professional body, quasi-private sector body. That will now be the foundation that will drive the activation and the harnessing of what we call the sports economy, which is basically what Amadou have said. So now we want to professionalize what we are doing, bring the professionals, bring the experts, bring the competence to run sports. And so we now come up with the framework that the Renewed Hope Initiative for Nigeria's sports economy, that is the foundation of what we are trying to do. And what are we trying to do? We are trying to change the entire concept of how we see and perceive sports in Africa. We now said we have the 3 pillars, we call the 3 Rs. That is, we have to reset the way we do things, the way we think. We have to relaunch the way we view our sports, and we have to refocus the way we see it. What do you mean by resetting? Resetting our sports means that we have to live the way we do things before. In Africa, we are more concerned about competitions, about participating at the World Cup, at the Olympics, and everything to the detriment of the domestic sports. Nobody is taking the kind of deliberate sports now, deliberate steps like have been taken by the NBA Africa, for example, to now lay the foundation to see how sports can grow that way. So we say we have to change that thinking. We should be more focused on developmental strategies, develop the sports ecosystem from the grassroots to the top level so we can create the enabling environment. We said we have to refocus what we do, which means we have to be intentional. We have to take the right decision, we have to be deliberate, put the right enablers. As a government, we have to do that to now give the platform for the private sector and also the public sector to do what they have to do to upscale sports. We say we have to relaunch our sports. Basically, we have to make it look better. We all sit in Africa and we are almost on what is happening in Europe. We love their sports, we love what they do, but why can't we also turn our sports to have that kind of appeal, to have that kind of system to do that? So that's the foundation of what we are trying to do. And now we have been given the mandate to drive that. But we believe as a government we have to take the first step to do that. And our government in Nigeria have taken the first 2 steps that is needed to now put the platform to do that. The first thing we did was to declare sports as a national asset, because sports is indeed a national asset, especially in Nigeria where we are. So which means it has to be taken, given all the enablers, all the legislation, all the incentives to attract the private sector to get it developed. And part of what we did now by having the Sports Commission, which has now removed the broadcasting and put sports directly on the table of the president of the country, meaning we can get things done fast, easy to develop. Second, we have to make the investment. So as a government, we decided to make a huge investment, at least in providing the infrastructures that is needed and upgrading the infrastructures, because that's a platform we need for now to get the private sector to do that. So those are the steps that we're trying to take. And then we now, as leading the charge, we said the objectives of what we are trying to do is now to professionalize the sports across all the levels of sports. So that we are doing it. We have to give the platform for the private sector to be involved. We have to restructure our federations in Africa because the sport federations are not operating the way they should. So we have to work to restructure the sports federations across all sports to make them more professionals and more direct and intentional in what they are doing. And of course, we have to go back to the grassroots and school sports, which is the foundation of how we can develop the sport to do that. The final outcomes we are looking at, if we are be able to put all this together, is that we should be viewing our sports in Africa, or in Nigeria, for example, not just as a game, but as an economic driver. So we are targeting that in the next couple of years, we should be seeing at least, I would just say something like that. We are targeting to have like 3 million jobs on the table, both direct, indirect, and induced through the activities we are trying to create with sports. We want to see our sports in Nigeria at least be at least 3% of GDP, which is basically what I think is achievable at 200 million people. We used to be the largest economy. We believe we are still the largest economy. We can be able to do that. And then we have to work on the infrastructure, of course, to get the right infrastructure to be able to host the best sporting events in Africa that can give us the enablers and put us on the right stage. Of course, we have talents in Africa. So if you can develop those talents, we can be able to export those talents across the globe and bring back those resources that we can get from exporting those talents and invest furthermore in the African structure to do that. So this is the global vision of what we are trying to do, and that is the objective we want to do. And we have taken the bold decision that Nigeria will try to show the way so that other African countries can be able now to key in to take this kind of bold decisions and intentional and deliberate decisions to get sports upscale to the right level. Yes, it can't happen overnight, but at least we have a target in the next 3 years. We should be able to come back and look at the final outcomes and see where we are. So we are not in a hurry to get to the, so we are achieving whatever we want to do. We have to develop from ground zero, top bottom.
Thank you for that, Mr. Dikko, because, just for the sake of the audience and the panelists, there are 3 or 4 key points that you made that I think needs reiteration. Very interesting comment you made, that sports as a sector does need the political support, does need the political patronage, but you guys have made a very smart decision, as you said, by moving it away from being a politically driven initiative. And that's actually a pretty interesting point you made. And I will probably come back to that a little later. The second point you made is about grassroots, right? That there has to be work done at the grassroots level for sport to become sustainable, the talent pool to come through. And then the third point that you made, which I found quite interesting, was how you are actually setting targets so that, as we know, nothing gets done if it cannot be measured. So the fact that you're putting targets in terms of its impact in the real economy is actually quite crucial. So I just thought that those 3 points needed to be reiterated from what you said. And that allows me to bring you in, Kenny. Obviously, years with FIFA. What you've done in the organization is there for everybody to appreciate. But the question I have for you, given what you heard just now, both from Amadou and Mr. Dikko, is where do you think the role of international sports federations lie, especially when it comes to the African continent, for it to receive that nuclear boost, if I may use that word, to propel sports into becoming an industry at a much faster pace than what governments themselves can do? What is the role and how can that role be played out?
Well, when you're sitting at FIFA, being the governing body of this sport, football, which is a worldwide sport, your duty is to educate. It's your very first duty, because your job is to develop your sport, but how can you develop it if you don't educate? And by educating, I am not only targeting the players, because the players is the grassroots, and it is the gold, if you are a gold miner, that will lead you to success, but you need to educate at all the levels. This is why I am quite happy to have heard what the players were saying just on the panel before, because you need the players to be educated, but you need the coaches to be educated, the technical coaches to be educated, and ultimately, you need the leaders to be educated. So you were questioning at the beginning why, with such a talented continent, with so many resources, why we don't succeed in creating a successful industry through sports compared with Europe or the US. Part of the answer might be in the education, and specifically the education of the leaders. So the consequence being the governance of all those organizations. So being an international federation, one of the key topics for us was capacity building, capacity development across our members. Because if I come back to Amadou and what you are doing right now, what you are allowed to do right now is indeed the result of the seeds that you planted like decades ago by preparing some countries, some leagues to be ready for their champion to be sitting in the BAL season in Rabat. It takes time. But in one word, education, I would say.
Great stuff. Nicolas,
Yes, Sanjeev.
it's actually a great time to bring you in. It's high time I brought you in. But the reason why it's a great time is because what I would like us to understand is obviously visionaries like Amadou is important, right? The state role, what Mr. Dikko brings is important. The role of the federation, very important. Where does the role of the African private sector lie? Do you have any views on that?
Well, I guess there are many ways the private sector can support the emergence of a sport ecosystem. I mean, Amadou Gallo, for instance, is before you were the president of the Basketball Africa League, you were the president of NBA Africa. He was the one, as far as I'm concerned, to bring on that continent the very narrative of sport is also a business. He was, to my knowledge, he was the very first person to go from ministry to minister to minister, from head of state to head of state, from country to country, to say, guys, sport is not only recreation, it's also a business. There is an entire ecosystem to be built. And so from nutrition to venue management to etc., the NBA actually sparked that very phenomenon. I mean, in my opinion, today, the development financial institutions are talking about creative industry, and most of them consider sport is part of creative industry, and there are so many events about the business of sport in Africa, etc. I mean, in my opinion, that man here brought that narrative on the continent. Before him, no one were even thinking like this. Now, if you want to discuss about the business of sport in Africa, for instance, my company is a great example. We went into sport. We are in public relation. Traditionally, public relation, at least on African soil, it doesn't make business with sport. You don't make if you want a PR agency anywhere in Africa, your main focus or your main industry is not sport. So in fact, at APO, we didn't enter into sport to make money or business. We entered into sport initially in 2017 to become the main official sponsor. So we were the one giving money and resources to Rugby Africa, the governing body of rugby in Africa. Now, several years, like 6-7 years down the line, Rugby Africa has become a client, like a paying customer, but we also have as a client NBA, we also have as a client Basketball Africa League, we also have as a client recently the International Olympic Committee on the Youth Olympic Games. And so it has been a journey, a discovery that yes, sport is indeed a business. I mean, I can testify that sport is a business. It's not a main industry at APO, but it's actually a business. And I'm only representing public relations. I'm not in venue management. I'm not into nutrition or etc. So yes, sport is a business in Africa, and the potential is huge.
Okay, so sports is a business, no question. Sports is definitely a business in Africa. Great stuff. Let me come to you, Amadou. Because of the work you've already done, the success you've had, success has its own challenges, right? So what's the growth plan for you, and how are you going to fund it?
Yeah, first of all, I want to remind everybody that we are only scratching the surface. So by no means I'm sitting here and saying, hey, we've arrived. I think, as Kenny noted, this is something that we spent a lot of time, making sure that we didn't skip any steps. And I think we still have a lot of work to do to educate, as he talked about, and to really, and I'm glad to hear this shift, when governments start to understand that, you have to manage sports, differently, because a country like Nigeria, since we opened our office, that's the place we designated as our #1 priority. How do we get it right in Nigeria? Because you got to win there, right? The best talent on the continent come from there. One of the greatest to ever play our sport, Hakeem Olajuwon, came from there, And coincidentally, the reason I'm talking about the steps before talking about this thing will fund itself, right? But we focus on creating the product. We got to create a product that is incredibly attractive. Somebody said this here earlier. I think it was Coach Walid. It's about, making sure that we eliminate any complex, right? We have an incredible talent across sports and music, fashion, And that's what our league is looking to bring together, right? And wherever we go, I was talking about this in January, the NBA game in Paris. Courtside, you see Rema, Omale, Davido. These are global superstars. Yeah. They fill up arenas around the world. We are going to make sure that we always interplay that connection between the creative and sports. So this is a fundamental piece. But then again, it is just coming from a place where we took our time to build the ecosystem, to build the talent, because the talent would come to the US raw. Hakeem and Dikembe Mutombo, our late brother and global ambassador, that left us September 30th, that, by the way, throughout the course of the Basketball Africa League, we'll be honoring. So when you follow their stories, it's almost like they just get into basketball by luck. Hakeem will tell you, OBG probably, you hear Coach OBG, this is an American coach who came to introduce basketball in his school. Hakeem was a handball goalie. 6 months later, he's in Houston, at the University of Houston, becoming the #1 overall draft pick in 1984 ahead of Michael Jordan. Dikembe is the same thing. He didn't go to Georgetown on a basketball scholarship. He was there on a scholarship from USAID to study medicine. These are Hall of Fame players. And imagine they could have been missed. Yeah. Imagine now how many of those guys are constantly being missed all across the continent. So we wanted to make sure that we create a more predictable pathway for when a young player is talented, have a passion, want to play the game, no matter where they are on the continent. Now we have systems and infrastructure that would allow them to showcase their talent. Then we launched the NBA Academy to be more intentional about identifying talent and developing this talent and unapologetically wanting to give these young talent a clear pathway to get to the NBA. We had last year our first player from the NBA Academy Africa based in Saly, Senegal, where, by the way, we partner with the Football Academy. You heard of Jambars. That's where we built our facility. There's a young man who was drafted straight from that academy to the NBA last year. His name is Ulrich Tomche. Came there as a 14-year-old from Cameroon, basically just starting to play the game. There's another young man, I'm talking about the University of Houston, from Nigeria, came from the NBA Academy. They just won from University of Florida. They just won the NCAA championship. His name is Ruben Chinelu. Came from the NBA Academy. Haman Maluach is another young man from South Sudan, was a refugee in Uganda, came to the academy as a 14-year-old, very skinny kid. He's projected to be in the top 10 in the lottery in the NBA draft. Just to say that we don't want to leave it to chance anymore. We want to make sure that we are making plans to, create this ecosystem that is going to create jobs, because you need these young people that I just mentioned to inspire that next generation of young players to want to take up the sport. You want to work with government to make sure that, the infrastructure, we just want to be the catalyst, right? To make sure that we need an arena in Lagos. We have some people that we know, partners who are working, on building an arena in Lagos. We are seeing more facilities. So we are pushing that narrative that our league is going to be the development of those gingival for the continent. That will support the development of West infrastructure. That will create jobs. That is going to create entertainment, sports entertainment out of the world. The entire world is going to want to soon. Because at the end of the day, value is going to come from the content that we're producing. The media right value. You see the that's our mission. I don't care how long it takes. We get there. The power of value. That's what it is. If we can hold your hand with government, the private sector, motivate the investment that is needed in the infrastructure. We have talent, but also not just our talent of Morocco. We focus on building work expertise. We're going to make sure that we have, more world-class coaches to world-class facilities, have world-class referees, have world-class broadcasters, content creators, people who can market, sell sport. So that's really what was decided to show how we fund it. We fund ourselves. We are building on that we're going to sell. We are right now attracting, world-class sponsors, Nike, we are partners also. Is our goal to talk right we are partners with Morocco. After partnerships is one member and so on and so on. So I'm going to stop there because I'm going to come to Mr. Dikko to latch on to one point because I like the confidence. Funding will come. What you're doing is focusing on the product, and obviously that's been fine-tuned.
Mr. Dikko, product is ready, funding is available. What about infrastructure? How are you looking at developing the infrastructure that will allow this product to play out?
Well, that's where the government is key, especially in Africa, because in Africa infrastructure is very expensive. So government have to intervene in that lane to make sure the right infrastructure is there. And even government cannot do it alone. So government have to provide the platform where government and the private sector can come together, the private investment, to get it done. For example, now in Nigeria, we are looking at creating sports cities. We are targeting 3 across the country, starting with Abuja. So we are working on that platform. Turn our national stadium in Abuja to a sports city, basically a sports and entertainment center, where we have world-class infrastructure, both for the sport and also for the entertainment and the tourism, the hotels, the convention centers, whatever we need to put the shopping malls and what have you to get it going. So government have to be take a lead on that to provide the incentives and to provide the drivers to be able to get that done, and that's basically what we are trying to do to show the pathway on that respect. Because without the infrastructure, all the plans cannot happen, and you cannot expect the private sector with this vision to come and also be building the infrastructure to also drive the vision. So government have to partner, for example, with the NBA Africa, provide the right infrastructure. Either direct investment or we get through the public-private partnerships to get it done. And basically, I think that's the best structure to get things done. We are working to change even the laws to provide the right incentives. For example, we are looking at in Nigeria now declaring our sports asset as a free zone. So if you declare the sports asset as free zone, for example, it allows the investors to come and invest because that eliminates for you the taxes and for certain number of years and stuff like that. So that will attract the private sector to come in to do that. Government can put in the money and can put the right incentives like what we're trying to do that. We can do legislation also across the way to see what can we be able to do to get that done. So infrastructure is very key. Without the infrastructure, that's the foundation. That is why our budget this year, the federal government of Nigeria, is targeted more as in the infrastructure. Then we allow the private sector to come and do the operations and drive the sports. They are all available. They can invest in it when the infrastructure is right.
Mm-hmm. If I just add 1 second,
Quickly, yes,
this is why it's incredibly important for us to motivate government, because it's not our job or interest to go and build bricks and mortar.
Correct.
So we want to bring the content, the product.
But to hold that thought, because Mr. Dikko, well said, and I agree, government has a big role to play. But Nigeria also has the means, right, to a large extent, to be able to have that budget from a government point of view. I want to come to you, Kenny, because not all countries are as fortunate or as blessed. What is the role of the likes of FIFA to provide funding support?
Well,
I mean, you talked of education, that's great.
no, indeed.
But real money is needed as well, right?
Indeed. But for me, money is a tool, and only a tool. So if you don't have a vision, you can have the amount of money you want, it will lead to nothing. So the question is more how you utilize money and where you direct the money with what kind of vision and what kind of energy, which is leadership, by the way, to get the results. So we at FIFA, indeed, we distribute a huge amount coming from the World Cups because it is the main revenue driver at FIFA. in Africa, for example, it's about $500 million that we distributed over the years
How do you distribute? Can you tell us?
via what Gelson Fernandez was explaining a little bit earlier, this FIFA Forward program, which is a funding program that we use for our 211 member association. So for Africa, it is to 54 members. But all the 54 members, more or less, they get the same. But you don't see the same result in all the 54 MAs. So I could take two examples, not to be long. One is the place we are in right now, today. And there is a reason for this. The reason why today we host the World Football Summit in Morocco is because we've had a strategy, a vision, and an energy. The reason why we are hosting in the coming 5 years 5 Women World Cup under 17 in Morocco is because of this vision and energy. And it is a vision and an energy and a leadership of the public sector. If it was not the king, it would not have happened. Of the private sector, without the OCP here or EvoSport, could not happen. And vision leadership of the association sector. Without Fouzi Leshka being the president of the Royal Federation of Morocco, it would not have happened. So you need a combination of those three leaders with a vision. And then the money is just a result of it. And unfortunately, in some of the countries here in the continent, it can work because you have an alignment of those three. And in some of it doesn't work. You would say, well, Morocco is a quite healthy country. Why don't you take another example? Let me give you another example, not far from here. Mauritania. Small federation, small resources, not such a big country in terms of revenue in GDP, but we found a leader in the president of the federation with a vision. And with only the money coming from FIFA, he managed to bring the infrastructure up to speed, state of the art. He managed to get the right coaches. He managed finally to get the right teams, and the players are growing progressively only with the FIFA money, which is for a country like Mauritania, something around 8 to 9 million in a cycle of 4 years. So money is not an issue at all.
Hold that thought.
Anyway, let me
Quickly,
if I can add here, for example, to solve the issue, what we are trying to do, we're also working to create a sports development fund in Nigeria that will solve the problem. Already the fund is receiving legislative attention. It's at the parliament to create the fund. And if that fund come in play, every year that fund could generate over $1 billion, for example, which would basically be targeted towards the infrastructure, developing the infrastructure and maintaining the existing infrastructure. So that's the vision we are working with. And that's basically what he says now that interests me, because you need the government to have the vision, and then you need to also get the federations and who are driving the sports and to have the same vision, to align the same vision to get that done. And then the private sector also will align. So the three parties have to align and be working the same lane to be able to have that kind of development we all envision that should happen. But we, at every point, as he said here, the government have to take the first step to put the right framework and the right enablers to drive this process in the first place. Then everybody will key in, and then the success will just be guaranteed at the long run.
Yeah. So hold that thought. I'll let Nicolas have the last word because you're running out of time. So we have heard some key words here: vision, education, leadership, right? Product, because the product has to be there. Nicolas, as a PR guy, what role does the diaspora play in this, given the amount of African talent that exists outside the African continent, and they are superstars? What role can the diaspora play in this?
Well, diaspora has typically more money, and so they can, the fan base, etc., etc. But you mentioned the keywords. Sorry, but one of the words I heard very often in the last 5 minutes is the word infrastructure. And I'm very happy and interested to see that word is mentioned so often, because personally, I'm involved in the world of sport, but also involved in the world of development. Some of my clients are, in fact, my first client was the African Development Bank and Africa Finance Corporation, Afrexim Bank, etc., etc. And I know that those development financial institutions 10 years ago also developed that narrative about industrialization, like the idea that Africa cannot just export cacao and just export oil, and they pay for chocolate and pay for gas, etc. So we need to build, industrialize Africa to be able to transform on African soil, which translates into employment and added value, etc. And I personally believe that there is a perfect parallel with sport.
Totally.
We're exporting talents, and then we are watching them playing on our TVs, and we have to play the TV right, etc. And I see infrastructure, just like Dangote built that refinery in Nigeria. I see infrastructure, so like the same idea. So I think it's about industrialization of sport, really, and infrastructure are key.
We run out of time. I think you raised a very important point. That is that how do we make the human resource beneficate itself on the continent, right? That's the last point you made, and thank you for that. I think in summary, all we can say is that from what we are hearing, there's a saying that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I think the time has definitely come for us to do something so that sports becomes an industry and does realize or help in realizing the demographic potential of the continent. Because otherwise it'll remain a demographic challenge.
Definitely.
And that's why sports is such a critical activity for us to look at, right? Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev.
Yep.